حبك يا لبنان 2020.
وجوب تسهيل مهمة رئيس الحكومة.
إن هذه المعادلة المصر قد ماتت على يد حزب الله بالذات.
We are prepared to strike whenever we choose.
Good afternoon and thank you for joining us on Future TV. I'm Lina Tamim and these are today's top stories. Future Bloc MP Khaled Zahir slams the critics of the Internal Security Forces Intelligence Branch, accusing them of serving the Syrian regime to defend Iran's project in the region. World leaders from G20 are arriving in St. Petersburg, Russia, where they will meet amid sharp differences over possible U.S. military action against Syria. And Egyptian Interior Minister Mohammed Ibrahim escapes a bomb attack targeting his convoy in Cairo. Future Bloc MP Khaled Zahir slams the critics of the Internal Security Forces Intelligence Branch, accusing them of serving the Syrian regime to defend Iran's project in the region. During a press conference he held in Tripoli, Zahir said the Lebanese should protect Lebanon by supporting the security forces. He insists, and I quote, Hezbollah should withdraw from Syria and safeguard the blood of the Shiite sect. He says the resistance's weapons are terrorizing the Lebanese and collaborating with the Syrian regime through assassinations. Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah had accused a Takfiri group of being behind a deadly car bombing in Beirut's southern suburbs on August the 15th. But Zahir declared the Takfiri group mentioned by Nasrallah was no other than the Syrian regime. Prime Minister-designate Tamam Salam slams political parties for hindering his efforts to form a cabinet since his appointment in April. Salam is accusing rival parties of favoring personal and political interests rather than the country's benefits. Following talks with President Michel Sleiman at Babda Palace, Salam reiterated his intention to keep up the efforts aiming at forming a new cabinet. Nationwide strikes called for by the Lebanese economic committees took place on Wednesday to protest against the ongoing political crisis that has affected economic growth in the country. The strikes, which affected most financial and economic sectors, aimed at putting pressure on political leaders to facilitate the formation of a new government. Interior Minister Marwan Sharbil has announced that starting Friday, municipal police forces will be given increased responsibilities in order to assist the National Security Forces' efforts to maintain security in the country. Sharbil urges municipalities to cooperate with the Interior Ministry in order to preserve security, since all necessary precautions need to be taken in light of the situation in the country. Lebanon's security situation has recently deteriorated after car bomb attacks left dozens dead and hundreds injured in Beirut's Dahieh and in the northern city of Tripoli. Free Patriotic Movement leader MP Michel Aoun has met with Saudi ambassador to Lebanon Ali Awad Asiri. Asiri visited Aoun in his Rabia residence and left without making any statement. Ties between Aoun and Riyadh have been strained ever since the lawmaker backed the Hezbollah-led March 8th camp. Aoun described the renewed ties with Riyadh as openness from his movement to different groups. Earlier today, Asiri held talks with Kataib leader Amin Jmayel over regional and domestic developments, mainly the possible U.S. military strike against Syria and the stalled cabinet formation in Lebanon. World leaders from G20 are arriving in St. Petersburg, Russia, where they will meet amid sharp differences over possible U.S. military action against Syria in response to what the U.S. administration calls a deadly chemical weapons attack. Today's summit comes hours after U.S. Senate panel has voted to give President Barack Obama authority to use military force against Syria. The rift between Obama and Russian President Vladimir Putin has been wide over possible military intervention in Syria. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has announced that the Syrian Special Envoy to the UN, Lakhdar Brahimi, is also due to attend the meeting, where he will push leaders for an international conference to be held on ending Syria's civil war. Activists say Brahimi's visit to the G20 Leaders Summit in St. Petersburg is a positive sign.
We universally condemn the use of chemical weapons, but bombing Syria is not the answer. Criminals need to be taken to the International Criminal Court and charged with war crimes. And what we want to see happen here at the G20 with respect to this issue is we want a political solution that will then go to the United Nations, which has the authority to act. We need to stop supplying arms on both sides, the Syrian government and to the rebels. There's something which is unsaid in every room right now, which is people are making money off of this war. You have the arms manufacturers, the small arms dealers. They make money every time there's a conflict like this. And who suffers? It's the women, it's the children, it's the men of Syria and of the region. By taking military action right now, we're not going to solve a problem, we're only going to make it worse.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry urges Congress to act quickly, saying U.S. national security and international credibility is at stake in the decision of whether to use force in Syria in response to the use of chemical weapons. Kerry, Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel, and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Martin Dempsey have made the case to launch limited strikes on Syria during a meeting between members of the House Foreign Relations Committee.
There is no question in my mind that the President of the United States does not bluff, and he is committed that Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. But if we fail to enforce a standard that has been in existence for almost 100 years regarding weapons of mass destruction, we are putting that into question in the minds of a lot of observers and creating problems for ourselves, where we may get closer to a test that cannot be constrained or managed as a consequence of the misinterpretation of our word today. If we back off and we fail to enforce our word here, I promise you that the discipline we've put in place with respect to the moderate opposition versus bad guys will dissipate immediately, and people will resort to anybody they can find to help them accomplish their goal, and we would have created more extremism and a greater problem down the road. So the word will be misinterpreted in many ways, not just Iran, Congressman.
And what would it take to tip the scales in favor of the opposition? If we were to take military action ourselves to support the opposition, that's a very long prospect. What we're talking about here is not that. The purpose is to deter and degrade for the specific purpose of chemical weapons. And I think it's the purpose that allows us to say with some confidence that our intent is to limit it. Now, that's not to say that I discount the risk of escalation, which I can never discount, but I can tell you we've mitigated it to as low as possible.
Now, on the ground in Syria, government troops and al-Qaeda-linked rebels are fighting over a regime-held Christian village for a second day. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says the fighters of al-Qaeda affiliated to al-Nusra Front has entered the Christian village of Ma'lula overnight. Despite heavy army presence in the village in western Syria, rebels patrolled its streets on foot and in vehicles, briefly surrounding a church and a mosque. The source says the rebels left Ma'lula early this morning, and heavy clashes between President Bashar al-Assad's troops and Nusra Front fighters have raged in surrounding mountains since then. A group of Islamist militants from Russia's volatile North Caucasus region fighting in Syria have announced their split with a major al-Qaeda-linked rebel unit to form an independent battalion. This is according to a video posted online, which shows over 40 fighters, many wearing face masks and equipped with assault rifles. Militants who have traveled from Russia's North Caucasus region, where the Kremlin is fighting an Islamist insurgency, have emerged as some of the most effective fighters waging battle against President Bashar al-Assad. Russia has estimated that about 200 of its citizens are fighting alongside Syrian rebels. Turkey's Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoglu warns that the Syrian refugee crisis may worsen if there is no international reaction to last month's chemical attack. Other officials from the region, including the Lebanese Minister of Social Affairs Wael Abu Fahoud, expressed their concern that the Syrian crisis is threatening not only their countries, but the whole world.
We are facing the dramatic escalation of the Syrian conflict, namely with the use of chemical weapons. We strongly appeal to the international community to overcome existing differences and come together to stop the fighting. All actions that are creating refugee flows need to cease. A political solution to end this cycle of horror is urgently needed. There is no humanitarian solution to the Syrian crisis. Rather, there needs to be a political solution to end the humanitarian crisis.
The situation in Lebanon is becoming very alarming. It's becoming very alarming on the security level, on the social level. It's becoming very alarming on the economic level, and it's becoming very alarming on the demographic level. And I think that so far the response of the international community to this crisis is frustrating.
Coming up next, Miss World 2013 officially begins in Jakarta, Indonesia. Stay with us.